She was always texting, but I never saw the messages. I found a second phone under the car seat, and it was full of, "I love you." We lived together in this tiny apartment downtown. Same cramped bedroom, same squeaky bed that drove our neighbors crazy. We'd been together for almost 2 years, and honestly, I thought things were pretty solid between us. Sure, we had our moments like any couple, but nothing that felt like relationship-ending stuff. The thing that started bothering me was how much she was on her phone. I mean, we're all glued to our screens these days, but this felt different. She'd be curled up next to me on the couch, and I'd catch these little smiles creeping across her face as she typed away. When I'd ask what was so funny, she'd just shrug and say it was her friends being ridiculous or some meme someone sent her. I trusted her completely back then. Why wouldn't I? We shared everything: rent, groceries, Netflix passwords, even that weird ritual of doing laundry together on Sunday mornings while arguing about whose turn it was to buy detergent. She knew I hated when people left dishes in the sink overnight, and I knew she needed her coffee before any meaningful conversation could happen. We had our rhythm down, but those late-night texting sessions kept getting longer. She'd stay up after I went to bed, the blue light from her screen casting this eerie glow in our dark bedroom. Sometimes I'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, and she'd still be typing away, trying to muffle the sound of her fingers tapping against the screen. When I'd mumble something about her coming to bed, she'd whisper that she was almost done and slip under the covers a few minutes later. The grocery run that changed everything happened on a random Tuesday. She was stuck at work late dealing with some crisis, and we were completely out of food. I'm talking bare cupboards, empty fridge, not even a sad piece of bread for toast. She tossed me her car keys and asked if I could handle the shopping run. Her car was this beat-up sedan that she'd inherited from her grandmother, reliable but showing its age in every creak and rattle. I made it through the store fine, loaded up on all our usual stuff plus some of those fancy crackers she liked but never wanted to splurge on herself. It was one of those mundane domestic moments that felt kind of nice, actually. Picking out her favorite yogurt flavors, remembering she was almost out of that specific face wash she swore by. Just normal couple stuff. The key slipped out of my hand as I was getting back into the car. They bounced off the driver's seat and disappeared somewhere under it. I was already running later than I'd planned, and the ice cream was starting to melt in the back seat, so I was getting pretty frustrated as I felt around blindly under the seat. My fingers brushed against something rectangular and smooth. Definitely not car keys. I pulled it out and found myself holding a phone I'd never seen before. Not her usual phone with the cracked screen protector and the case covered in stickers from places we'd visited together. This one was sleek, black, completely generic looking. The screen lit up when I picked it up. No password protection, no security at all. And right there on the lock screen were notifications from someone with just a first name as the contact. The preview text made my hands shake as I read it. I sat there in that parking lot for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 10 minutes. The rational part of my brain kept insisting there had to be some reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a work phone she'd forgotten to mention. Maybe she was planning some surprise and didn't want me to accidentally see messages about it. Maybe it belonged to someone else entirely and had just ended up in her car somehow. But I couldn't stop myself from unlocking it and scrolling through the messages. What I found there made my stomach drop to somewhere around my shoes. Months and months of conversations with this guy. Not just friendly chats or work stuff. Full-blown romantic messages that made me feel sick to read. The worst part wasn't even the lovey-dovey stuff, though that was bad enough. It was how she talked about me. According to her messages, I was her crazy ex-boyfriend who refused to accept that we were over. She'd painted this whole picture of me as some pathetic guy who wouldn't move out of her apartment, who kept bothering her and making her life difficult. She told him she was scared to kick me out because I might do something unpredictable. I drove home in complete autopilot mode. Somehow managed to carry all the groceries upstairs and put everything away in the right places, even though my hands were shaking the entire time. She got home about an hour later, looking tired and stressed from her long day. She thanked me for handling the shopping, kissed my cheek like she always did, and asked what I wanted to do for dinner. I spent the next few days walking around in this weird fog. Every normal interaction we had felt like I was watching actors in a play. She'd curl up next to me while we watched TV, and I'd wonder if she was thinking about him. She'd ask me about my day over breakfast, and I'd hear her voice but remember how she described me to someone else as this unwanted presence in her life. The hardest part was how normal everything seemed on the surface. She still laughed at my terrible jokes, still stole bites of my food when she thought I wasn't looking, still did that thing where she'd absent-mindedly play with my hair while we were lying in bed. If I hadn't found that phone, I never would have suspected anything was wrong. I kept checking the phone over the next week. I know that was probably wrong of me, but I couldn't help myself. Their conversations continued just like before, full of plans for their future together and complaints about the inconvenience of having to deal with me. She told him she was working on getting me out of the picture permanently, that she just needed a little more time to figure out the logistics. Update 1. The breaking point came when I read a message where she told him she loved him more than she'd ever loved anyone, that she couldn't wait until they could be together properly, without having to sneak around. She said she dreamed about waking up next to him every morning instead of having to pretend with me. That night, she fell asleep with her arm thrown across my chest like she'd done hundreds of times before. I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling like the biggest fool in the world. How long had this been going on? How many of our shared moments had been fake on her end? When she smiled at something on her phone, was she thinking about him? When she told me she loved me, was she comparing me to him in her head? I started noticing things I'd somehow missed before. How she always took her phone with her to the bathroom, even for quick trips. How she'd gotten suddenly interested in working late or having girls' nights that she'd never mentioned enjoying before. How she'd started wearing different perfume and buying clothes that weren't really her usual style. The worst realization was that our sex life had actually improved over the past few months. I'd been so happy about it, thought we were growing closer as a couple. Now I understood she was probably thinking about him the whole time, using me to practice or work out her frustrations or whatever. The thought made me feel physically ill. I knew I needed to confront her, but I also knew she'd just deny everything and probably get better at hiding it. I'd seen enough of these situations play out with friends to know how it usually went. She'd cry, promise it meant nothing, swear she'd end it, and then just be more careful about covering her tracks. Instead, I decided to get creative. I spent a few days figuring out his schedule based on their messages. He worked pretty normal hours and lived across town in one of those new apartment complexes. They'd been trying to find a good time to meet up without me getting suspicious, and she kept having to make excuses about why she couldn't see him. So I made it easier for them. I sent him a message from her phone while she was in the shower, telling him that I was going to be out of town for the weekend visiting family. She'd love to have him over to the apartment on Saturday afternoon so they could finally have some real alone time together. I made sure to include our address and told him to just come right up, that she'd leave the door unlocked for him. Saturday morning, I told her I had to run some errands and would be gone for a few hours. She seemed pleased about having the apartment to herself, said she was planning to relax and catch up on some shows. I kissed her goodbye like normal and headed out, but I didn't go far. Just parked around the corner where I could see our building's entrance. Right on schedule, this guy showed up at our door. Tall, decent-looking, carrying flowers and what looked like a bottle of wine. He seemed nervous as he climbed the stairs to our floor. I gave him about 5 minutes to get settled, then headed back up myself. I could hear voices through the door as I quietly unlocked it. She sounded confused, asking him what he was doing there and how he'd gotten in. He was explaining about the message she'd supposedly sent, talking about how excited he'd been to finally spend real time together without having to worry about her crazy ex. I walked into our living room and found them both standing there looking absolutely terrified. She'd gone completely white, and he looked like he was trying to figure out if he should run or try to explain himself. The flowers were still in his hand, drooping slightly as he realized what was happening. The silence stretched on for probably 30 seconds, though it felt like an eternity. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out what story she could possibly tell that would make this okay. He kept looking between us like he was watching a tennis match, clearly having no idea what to do with himself. Update 2. What happened next was honestly the most awkward hour of my entire life. I didn't yell or make a scene like they probably expected. Instead, I just sat down on our couch and started talking to him like we were having a perfectly normal conversation. I introduced myself as her boyfriend and asked him how long he'd been seeing her. She tried to interrupt and control the narrative, but I kept redirecting the conversation back to him. Asked him what she'd told him about me, about our living situation, about our relationship. Watched his face change as he started putting pieces together and realizing how badly he'd been lied to. Turns out, she'd been telling him for months that we were broken up, but I was refusing to move out. That she was scared of me and didn't know how to get rid of me safely. She'd painted herself as this victim trapped in a bad situation, just trying to move on with her life but being held back by her obsessive ex. The guy actually seemed decent, just completely manipulated. He'd been trying to be respectful of what he thought was a difficult situation she was dealing with. When he realized I had no idea they'd been seeing each other and that we were very much still together in my mind, he looked genuinely horrified. She kept trying to interrupt, to spin some new version of events that would somehow make this all okay. But there really wasn't anything she could say at that point. The evidence was overwhelming, and her lies were falling apart in real time as we compared notes on what she'd told each of us. The guy ended up apologizing to me, which was surreal. He said he never would have gotten involved if he'd known the real situation. He thought he was helping her escape from a bad relationship, not participating in cheating on an ongoing one. He left pretty quickly after that, looking shell-shocked. After he was gone, she finally broke down. Not apologetic crying, but angry, defensive tears. She accused me of violating her privacy by going through her phone, of setting up some kind of elaborate trap instead of just talking to her like an adult. She said I was controlling and manipulative, that this whole situation proved she was right to want to get away from me. I let her vent for a while, then asked her a simple question. How long had she been planning to leave me? Was she ever going to tell me the truth? Or was she just going to keep lying until she figured out a clean exit strategy? She couldn't give me a straight answer. Kept talking around it, making excuses, blaming me for various things that supposedly drove her to seek comfort elsewhere. Said she'd been unhappy for months but didn't know how to bring it up. That she'd felt trapped and scared and didn't think I'd handle a breakup well. The thing that really got to me was that she still wouldn't just admit what she'd done. Even caught red-handed, she kept trying to justify it and make it somehow my fault. Like if I'd been a better boyfriend, she wouldn't have needed to find someone else. If I'd been more understanding, she would have felt safe telling me she wanted out. I ended up packing a bag and staying with a friend for a few days while I figured out what to do next. Our lease wasn't up for another 6 months, and most of our stuff was tangled together after 2 years of living as a couple. The practical aspects of breaking up were almost harder to deal with than the emotional ones. Final update. The next few weeks were a complete nightmare to navigate. We had to figure out who was keeping the apartment, how to split up all our shared belongings, whose name was on which bills. All those mundane details that make a breakup feel like dismantling an entire life you'd built together. She ended up moving out, which was probably for the best since I'd been the one paying most of the rent anyway. But packing up 2 years' worth of shared memories was brutal. Finding little reminders of good times we'd had, gifts we'd given each other, photos from trips where we looked genuinely happy together. The worst part was how much I missed her, even after everything. I'd wake up reaching for her side of the bed, or automatically buy 2 of something at the grocery store out of habit. I'd see something funny and want to text her about it before remembering that we weren't doing that anymore. I kept wondering what would have happened if I'd never found that phone. Would she have eventually worked up the courage to leave me honestly? Would she have just kept both relationships going indefinitely? Was any of what we had together real? Or was I just a convenient placeholder while she figured out what she really wanted? The guy, let's call him Jake, actually reached out to me a few weeks later. Apparently, she tried to reconnect with him after I moved out, spinning some news story about how the whole thing had been a misunderstanding. But he wasn't interested in getting tangled up in her drama again. He said he'd learned his lesson about getting involved with someone who wasn't being straight about their situation. That conversation was weirdly comforting. It confirmed that I wasn't crazy or overreacting, that what she'd done really was as messed up as it felt. Sometimes when you're in the middle of something like that, you start questioning your own judgment and wondering if you're making a bigger deal out of it than you should. The hardest part of the whole experience wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was realizing how long I'd been living in a completely different reality than she was. While I was making plans for our future and feeling grateful for what we had together, she was actively working to replace me. While I was trusting her completely and never questioning her behavior, she was calculating how to manage 2 separate relationships without getting caught. It made me wonder about every other relationship I'd ever had. Had I missed signs before? Was I just bad at reading people? Or was she particularly good at deception? How do you ever trust someone completely after realizing how wrong you can be about what's really going on in their head? But there was also something liberating about finally knowing the truth. Those months of sensing something was off, but not being able to put my finger on it had been driving me slowly crazy. At least now I understood why she'd seemed distant, why our conversations had started feeling forced, why she'd been so protective of her phone and her privacy. I spent a lot of time that fall just focusing on myself and figuring out who I was outside of that relationship. Rediscovered hobbies I'd let slide, reconnected with friends I hadn't seen much of while we were together, started thinking about goals and dreams that didn't involve another person. The apartment felt too big and too quiet at first, but gradually I started appreciating having my own space again. Being able to leave dishes in the sink overnight if I wanted to, watching whatever I felt like on TV, not having to negotiate every little decision with someone else. About 6 months later, I ran into her at a coffee shop downtown. She looked different, new haircut, different style of clothes, like she was trying on a whole new version of herself. We made awkward small talk for a few minutes. She seemed to want to explain herself or apologize, but I wasn't really interested in rehashing everything. She mentioned that she was seeing someone new, someone she'd met through work. I found myself wondering if this new guy knew about her history of maintaining multiple relationships, if she'd learned to be more honest, or if she was just better at managing her deceptions now. The whole experience taught me that you can never really know another person completely, no matter how close you think you are. People are capable of compartmentalizing in ways that seem impossible until you see it firsthand. Someone can share your bed every night and still be living a completely separate emotional life that you know nothing about. But it also taught me to trust my instincts more. Those months when I sensed something was off but talked myself out of it, I should have paid attention to that feeling instead of dismissing it. When someone's behavior changes in subtle ways, when they become protective of things they used to share freely, when they start having unexplained absences or new interests they can't quite explain, those things mean something. I'm in a better place now, honestly. Single and okay with it, focused on building a life that feels authentic and fulfilling on its own terms. When I do start dating again, I'll be looking for someone who's genuinely available and honest, not someone who's trying to juggle multiple relationships or figure out what they want by testing different options simultaneously. The whole thing was painful and humiliating and confusing, but it also forced me to grow up in ways I probably needed to. I learned to trust myself more, to set better boundaries, to pay attention when something doesn't feel right instead of making excuses for it. And honestly, I'm kind of grateful that I found out when I did, rather than wasting more years with someone who was never really committed to building something real together. Better to know the truth and deal with it than to keep living in a fantasy that was only real for one of us.